Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Shall we start the class? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So today I will be telling you in briefly about congenital dislocation of hip. Okay. So what is the meaning of congenital dislocation of hip? Congenital means that anything which occurs during birth or by birth it should be present. Dislocation means, as you all are aware, that any joint is made up of two articulating surfaces. Whereas hip joint, what are the articulating surfaces? Femoral head and the acetabulum.
Acetabulum.
Yeah. So dislocation means there is complete separation of the two articulating surfaces. So there won't be any contact between the femoral head and the acetabulum surface. Okay. And the other terminology is subluxation. Subluxation means partial separation of the two articulating surfaces. So as you are seeing on the screen, the title is given is here as developmental dysplasia of hip. You might be wondering why the topic given was congenital dislocation, whereas he has put a title as developmental dysplasia of hip. So previously it was called as congenital dislocation of hip, which implying a condition which existed at birth. But whereas during the study observation, they told it includes the condition arises because of the abnormality which occurs during the embryonic growth, fetal growth, and even also after birth during the infantile period. So they have changed the nomenclature to developmental dysplasia of hip. So it includes, as I just now told, subluxation of the hip joint, dislocation of the hip joint, and even the hip joint may be normal, but it can be dislocatable, where the femoral head is located within the acetabulum. Because of the ligament laxity which is present during the birth, the joint can be dislocatable. Whereas, and the other term is dysplasia. So this is acetabular dysplasia. Dysplasia means abnormal growth or insufficient growth. So the developmental dysplasia includes all these terminologies. It's a spectrum of disorder which includes subluxation of the joint or dislocation of the joint, or a normal joint which can be dislocatable, and there will be a abnormal development of the acetabulum. Are you clear with this? Sorry.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So this is the most common abnormality present in a newborn infant. So the clinical hip instability will be 1 to 3% in all the neonates. Whereas if we go for an ultrasound examination of this instability, the chances may go up to 15%, incidence may go up to 15%. So at 80% of these cases will resolve spontaneously. No treatment may be required. This instability which occurs at birth will be due to the ligament laxity which occurs during in the delivery or childhood, and it will resolve spontaneously in 80% of the cases. Let's see the epidemiology of this disorder. So incidence is 1 in 1000 live births. This incidence is based on the US studies, whereas in Indian studies the incidence is still more, and females are more commonly affected in the ratio of 8:1. I will tell you why this female ratio is more in the coming slides. And the babies who are going to get delivered via breech deliveries have more incidence in the ratio of 6:1 compared to vertex presentations. And major 75% of the babies are the firstborn babies, the first delivery, primary. And the ratio of joint which is affected is left hip is most commonly affected compared to right, and even bilateral dislocations are more common compared to right side. This also occurs because of the position of vertex delivery which is normally occurs. That is the reason for this. So, and the positive family history increases the incidence by 10% of chances. It is most common in white children compared to black. So coming to the etiology, we'll decide it is based as a mechanical factors, environmental factors, and genetic factors. Coming to first, primarily mechanical factors. So as I told, breech delivery. Why in breech delivery it is more common? So normally the acetabulum forms by three fascial fusion. In the center, it has a triradiate cartilage. So triradiate cartilage comprises of the iliac fasces, pubic fasces, as well as ischial fasces. So that all three in the center of the acetabulum forms the round globular acetabulum. So the normal pressure of the femoral head should be there. As you are aware, in Hooter-Oakman's principle, any growth plate under pressure grows normally. So the normal pressure which is required to form a round socket of the acetabulum will, should be required here. So during in the breech deliveries, the limbs are, as you are aware, sorry, in the diagram here it shows that femur is adducted and flexed. So normal position is in this position which should be there. This is flexed and adducted. So the normal concentric pressure which is required to form the normal acetabulum is absent. So because of this, the lateral wall of the acetabulum won't get the proper pressure and there will be abnormal growth. So this will lead to the dysplastic acetabulum. So that's why it's more common in breech delivery. Whereas in the vortex delivery, that it is femur is flexed and adducted. So it gives a proper abductor, it gives proper pressure to the normal development of the acetabulum. Whereas it's the same thing applies here in the cultures where the people will carry the baby in swaddling clothes with the hipping extension. So this will also lead to abnormal development of the acetabulum, leading to the subluxation or dislocation of the hip. Next is the hormonal factors. This explains why the female ratio is more common compared to the male patients. Relaxin is a hormone which occurs in the mothers. It helps in the relaxation of the uterine walls to accommodate the growing baby. So the same relaxing hormone passes through the placental circulation to the female baby, and along with this, the other hormones are estrogens, which getting secreted by the female baby. They will cause the laxity of the ligaments around the hip joint. So the chances of getting dislocation or subluxation will be high. Dislocatable hips. Instability will be more. The relaxin is the one of the hormone. Then coming to the genetic factors. So there will be normally in the ligaments, the type 1 collagen will be more, but whereas in this abnormal genetic problem, there will be increased level of type 3 collagen, which leads to ligament laxity. The next cause is idiopathic or primary. So we don't know the etiology why the acetabulum has been dysplastic or abnormal growth in the acetabulum. So because of this, why, and next thing is why the baby firstborn condition. So in the firstborn, the mother's uterus is a virgin uterus. It has not expanded because of the previous deliveries. So there will be intrauterine crowding, or sometimes there may be oligohydramnios. Because of this, intrauterine crowding effect will be occurring. So because of this, again breech deliveries will be more common. So the abnormal development of the acetabulum. So same thing occurs associates with why these associated conditions will occur. So associated conditions along with the congenital dislocation of hip are congenital torticollis, metatarsus adductus, callipes equinovarus, and congenital dislocation of knee also will be there. Next, let's see the pathologies. What are the pathology which occurs in this condition? The pathology which occurs in this condition can be divided into changes which occur in the bone, changes which occur in the soft tissues, and changes which occur in the capsule. Changes in the bone. First thing is the acetabulum. Acetabulum will be shallower than the normal, and the lateral wall of the acetabulum will be more sloped because of the abnormal pressure, or which doesn't causes the normal growth. And the acetabulum will be occupied by an overgrowth of the fibrocartilage, and the ligament remains of the ligamentum teres. So head of the femur becomes flat and the neck of the femur becomes short. So changes in the soft tissue. First thing is the capsule. Capsule assumes an hourglass contracture, as you see here in the slide here. So one part which is involving the fibrofatty cartilage and the ligamentum teres, and the other part involving holding the femoral head. So it assumes an hourglass shapes, and it prevents the relocation of the femoral head into the acetabular. Next are the muscle groups. The muscles are the can be divided into pelvifemoral, pelvitrochanteric, and the gluteal group. Pelvifemoral group muscles include adductors, hamstrings, pectineus, rectus, all those things. These become shortened because of the dislocated hip femur and contracts. So they form an obstacle to the direction of the head. Pelvitrochanteric group are the arterial quadratus and so on. They become stretched and elongated. Gluteal groups, because of the dislocated hip, they will lose their power. Coming to the clinical presentations, how do the babies with dislocated hips present to the clinics? So it again it varies according to the age of the presentation. At what age you will see the patient in the hospital, the presentation differs. Neonate, any baby up from birth up to the age of 1 month is called neonate. So in the neonate, what are the complaints the mother presents to us? Usually the first complaint, mother comes to the hospital bringing the baby saying that there is a difficult, usually you won't be able to identify them during the birth. All the neonates has to be screened by the pediatrician to identify is there any instability at the hip. So how do you identify them? There are two tests called Ortolani's and Borlow's tests. So all the pediatricians usually they do these tests to any baby who is delivered to identify any instability of the hip, whether it is there or not. So first thing is the Ortolani's test. As you all see here, with the baby lying supine, hips are flexed, hip and knee are flexed at 90 degrees. And the thumb is placed over the medial aspect of the thigh, and the index finger and middle finger is placed over the greater trochanterus. So here what you will do, you will try to abduct the hip. So when you are abducting, if the hip is unstable or dislocated, it will reduce with a click. This is called as Ortolani's test. The second one is Borlow's. We call it as a provocative maneuver. Provocative maneuver means if the hip is unstable, you are trying to dislocate the hip and observing whether the hip can be dislocated or not. Same thing, when the baby is with the supine, the hip and knee are flexed to 90 degrees and the affected limb is held with the palm, with the thumb on the medial side of the femur and the index and middle finger over the greater trochanter. You'll flex and adduct and you'll put a pressure along the axis of the femur. So if the hip is unstable, you will feel a click and the hip gets dislocated. So these are the two tests which can be done in a neonate. So this is how one will screen a unstable hip in the neonatal period. So, and these neonatal period instabilities, most of them are due to ligamentous laxity and they will disappear, they will resolve spontaneously. 80% of them will resolve spontaneously at the end of 1 month. Then the infant, coming to the infant. So, infant is the baby from 1 month to age of 1 year. So, here the generalized ligament laxity which occurs during the neonatal period will resolve. So because of this, the hips which are dislocated will stay like that only and they won't be reducible. So after the age of 1 month, this Ortolani and Borlow's test will become negative. So we cannot do this Ortolani and Borlow's test in a infant from after the age of 1 month. So how during this period only, usually the mothers will bring the baby to the hospital. The main complaint will be there is a limitation of abduction. When the mother tries to apply a diaper or a chuddy or something, they will observe that there is a limitation of abduction on one side of the limb. So as here the clinical picture depicts, one side is clearly abductable, other side the abduction is limited. And when you flex both the hips and knees to 90 degrees, so the affected knee, because of the proximal migration of the femur, the dislocated, affected knee will be at a lower level compared to the normal one. This is called as Galeazzi sign. Otherwise, even it is known as Alice sign. So, and the other identification mark is asymmetry of thigh folds. Because of the proximal migration of the femur, the soft tissues will create more folds in the thigh. So there will be an abnormal increase in the thigh folds. And on palpation, you can feel compared to the opposite side, there will be a proximal migration of the greater trochanter. And the next one will be the telescopy test. Telescopy means all you are aware, one tube going into another tube. So here femur on flexion of the hip into 90 degrees, if you apply a pressure on the longitudinal axis of the femur, because the hip is dislocated, the femur will easily move into the gluteal region, and give an impression that, and when you pull out, it will come out easily. So this gives you an impression that telescopy is occurring. So telescopy will be positive. So next sign is vascular sign of Narath. Normally, where do you palpate femoral pulses? Femoral pulses are palpated 1 inch below and lateral to the inguinal.
0.75 centimeters.
How to palpate any pulses? Backside there should be a hard bone support. So usually we will palpate the femoral pulses against the femoral head. There. So here, as the femoral head is absent in the cavity, hip joint, the vascular sign of you cannot palpate the femoral pulses. Femoral pulses will be absent. So this is what we call it as vascular sign of Narath is positive. If we say positive, the femoral pulses will be absent. So coming to cases of bilateral dislocation, how do they present? So because both the hips are dislocated, there will be absence of asymmetry and abduction. Both sides will abduct in an equal quantity, and both flexed knees like the Galeazzi test or the Alice test will be again negative, because both flexed knees will be at same level because of the dislocation. Only sign we can observe is there will be a widening of the perineum and the patient will have excessive lumbar lordosis. And other tests will be like telescopy will be positive and vascular sign of Narath will be positive here. Next, after the age of 1 year, the patient will start walking. So how do you identify this walking child? How do they present to the clinics? In case of unilateral, you will clearly see there is a shortening of the limb because of the dislocation, proximal migration of the femur. And because of the shortening, the babies will start walking, and there will be because of the reduction in the power of the gluteal muscles, there will be a Trendelenburg gait, or else called as abductor lurch. The patient will lurch to the affected side. And again, in a unilateral case, Galeazzi sign on flexion of the knees, the affected knee will be at lower level and vascular sign of Narath will be positive. Whereas in bilateral cases, waddling gait we call it as, like the ducks. How do the ducks walk? It's called as duck waddling gait. The patient will be lurching on to both sides when the baby foot bears on the weight on the affected side. So there will be excessive lordosis. And one more important finding in the bilateral cases will be increased rotations. Increased internal and external rotation of the hip joint will be there. It will be, even in unilateral cases, it will be there, but it will be there only in the affected side. Now, we'll go after the clinical findings. Once we have to go for the investigations. The primary modality of investigations here is radiology. So in the newborn hips, the unstable hips appears normal. Why? The normally femoral capital femoral epiphysis is cartilaginous at birth. So it ossifies only at the age of 6 months. So almost up to the age of 6 months, because of the cartilaginous nature of the capital femoral epiphysis, it will be absent in the hip joint. So X-rays won't be able to detect. So I'll show you how to what to read on the X-rays. So this is the X-ray of a dislocated hip. So now the center of the acetabulum is called as the triradiate cartilage here. This is the triradiate cartilage which I told. The iliac fasces, ischial fasces, and the pubic fasces, all three will form. This is the center of the acetabulum where it occurs. So a horizontal line connecting the both the triradiate cartilages are called as Perkins line. Hilgenreiner's line, and the vertical line perpendicular to this is called as Perkins line. So normally here in the normal side you can see the femoral epiphysis which will be this. Perkins and Hilgenreiner's will divides the acetabulum into 4 quadrants. Here 4 quadrants: inner, upper, inner lower, outer upper, outer lower. So normally the femoral epiphysis will be in the lower medial compartment or inner lower compartment. So whereas in the dislocation side, it will be in the outer and upper compartment. Okay, and compared to the normal side, the femoral epiphysis size will be reduced compared to this, and there will be a migration of the trochanter proximally compared to the normal side. And when you pass a line along the inferior margin of the neck, it will form a continuous arc to the inferior border of the superior pubic ramus. This is called as Shenton's line. So normally it should pass as a line, whereas here because of the proximal migration there will be a break in the Shenton's line. And to the Perkins line, when you draw a line from the center of the acetabulum or triradiate cartilage to the lateral wall of the acetabular roof, this forms an angle. This is called as acetabular index. So normally the acetabular index will be around 25. It should be more than 25 degrees. It should be less than 25 degrees. Sorry, but whereas here, because of the abnormal lateral growth of lateral sloping, the acetabular index will be increased. So how do you identify less than a dislocation in a patient who is less than 6 months old? As I told just now, the epiphysis will ossify only at the age of 5 to 6 months. So that's why one reason view is there. It is usually neonates. Sorry. So the limbs are abducted into 45 degrees and kept in maximal internal rotation. And when you pass a line along the shaft of the femur, it will enter into the center of the triradiate cartilage. Whereas in case of a dislocated hip, it will move above. It will go up and it will bisect the iliac bone. The other investigative modality is ultrasonography. It's useful in neonate hip. And once you inject a dye and ultrasound, when you do, because of the cartilaginous nature, you will be able to identify the epiphysis in the gluteal region. Next is the arthrography, where you inject a dye into the joint and take an X-ray, and there will be loss of rose thorn appearance because of the ligamentum teres and limbus which forms on the femoral epiphysis. There will be appearance of rose thorn, but because of the dislocation, there will be loss of rose thorn appearance. MRI and CT will give an excellent anatomic visualization, but MRI is expensive and it requires sedation, hence it is not advised in the pediatric groups. And CT will be giving a positive evidence only after the age of 6 months, as the epiphysis is cartilaginous in nature. So coming to the treatment, what are the aims of the treatment in this DDH? To reduce the dislocated hip into the acetabulum and to maintain it in the reduced position till it becomes stable. So the treatment is again tailored to the age. Means Goals again are concentric reduction and maintenance of the reduction in the joint. So coming to the neonate. So in the neonate, you reduce and give them splints. So there is this called as Pavlik harness. It is a dynamic flexion abduction splint and use it for 6 weeks. It prevents hip extension and adduction. So it's a splint. It consists of a chest strap, 2 shoulder straps, 2 limb straps. So you can adjust these straps to position this hip joint into the acetabulum. So this will flex the hip and abduct. So which helps in the concentric pressure of the growing acetabulum. So it helps in the remodeling of the acetabulum to become normal. So this harness has to be used full time, 24/7 for at least 2 weeks. And 90% of the cases will get reduced by 2 weeks, and it requires continuous wear for at least 4 to 6 weeks. So, and this after 6 weeks of that, you can remove the harness and then you can mobilize the patient. If the harness is not if the dislocation is not reduced by this harness by 4 weeks in a child of less than 6 months old, one should stop wearing this harness. So Pavlik harness is advised in the age of 1 to 6 months, and with these straps you can adjust the position of the how much flexion and abduction it is required here. So by adjusting that, one has to take frequent radiographs and in every week and see the position of the femoral head in relation to the acetabulum and do the adjustments in the straps and continue this for 6 weeks. So coming to the new one from 1 to 6 months again, Pavlik harness and Van Rosen splints, other splint which is used here. So usually, sorry. So after the age of 6 months, these splints won't work because of the instable ligament laxity. Everything wears off and the hip gets fixed in the dislocated position. The harness or splints won't work. So from this, traction has to be applied for the relaxation of the contracted capsule and the soft tissues around the hip joint. The traction has to be kept for 2 to 3 weeks with the hips flexed to 90 degrees with the buttocks off the bed. So after the traction, we have to do a close reduction under anesthesia. For do this, as I told in the pathology in the soft tissues, the adductors and all get contracted. It will form an obstacle for the reduction. So one had to do an adductor tenotomy to reduce them. So after doing an adductor tenotomy, close reduction is done under anesthesia, and a spica cast is applied with a 95 degrees of flexion at hips and 40 to 45 degrees of abduction at, and this spica cast should be continued for 2 months, and again after 2 months one has to check for the reduction and again apply for another 2 months with a total duration of 4 months. In case if close reduction is not possible, one has to go for an open reduction. Coming to the patient with the walking age group, toddler 18 months to 3 years. So here femoral head is proximally migrated and all the capsule, everything is contracted. Even with open reduction, one won't be able to bring the femur down to the acetabular root. So how to bring the femoral head down into the acetabulum? So we'll do a femoral shortening osteotomy. We'll remove a segment of the femur and then bring the femoral head down to the acetabulum and do a derotation osteotomy to keep it in the acetabulum. So in a juvenile child, 3 to 8 years. So here again, the treatment depends whether on open reduction one is able to bring the femoral head into the acetabulum concentric reduction or not possible. Depending on that, we have to do a acetabular osteotomies here. They are called as acetabular reorientation osteotomy because they are almost of the age of 3 to 8 years. The abnormal lateral wall, sloping of the lateral wall has to be bring back to cover the femoral head, which is going to reduce, we will be reducing by open reduction. So its main thing is when the concentric reduction is we are able to achieve, but there is a deficient lateral acetabular wall. This acetabular reorientation osteotomies are advised. The most common osteotomy we do is Pemberton osteotomy. So here, as the picture depicts, it's an incomplete osteotomy where the osteotomy go to the triradiate cartilage and the entire bone is tilted to give a coverage to the lateral wall of the femoral head, which is to cover the so that the acetabular orientation is achieved. Next one is the Salter's osteotomy. So here the iliac bone is divided completely above the osteotomy, and whole of the lower bone is tilted to give a coverage to the femoral head. Here the femoral hinge will be occurring at the pubic symphysis. So when concentrical reduction is not able to achieve, one has to go for a Chiari's osteotomy, where you divide by an osteotomy above the acetabular roof, and entire lobe off is pushed medially, so that the superior portion of the ilium gives a coverage for the femoral head, and it deepens the acetabulum. Next one is the shell procedure, where you are not able to bring it get a concentric reduction, as well as one is not in a position to do a reorientation. We'll take a bone graft from the ilium and we'll make it as a shelf above in the acetabular roof. So it prevents the proximal migration of the femoral head. Whereas in case of adolescent and young adult, in unilateral cases, we do total replacement at an appropriate age. Whereas in bilateral cases, the treatment is still debatable because even if we do surgeries, we cannot assure the same result in both hips. So even if you operate, one may have a partial complete recovery in one hip, or the other hip there may be partial recovery, or they may require multiple surgeries. So some few schools says that you have to operate for both the cases, whatever may be the result. But few cases say that in bilateral cases, usual deformity will be excessive lordosis and they will have a duct waddling gait. Leave them, don't treat, because the complications will be higher. Complications here are avascular necrosis, inadequate reduction and redislocation, and even after surgery, when the patients present at a later age, there may be residual acetabular dysplasia. The last one is teratologic dislocation. It's a true congenital dislocation which occurs in utero. It is secondary to multiple congenital contracture or chromosomal abnormalities, or even in Larsen syndrome. So typically the hip is not reducible at birth. Because of this congenital contraction, the ligament laxity won't be there. So the hip gaze will be fixed in a dislocated position. So the treatment is controversial, and it may require multiple procedures to keep the hip reduced with a very bad prognosis. So this is the things. To summarize, the congenital dislocation nomenclature has been changed to developmental dysplasia of hip to include a spectrum which occurs in the embryonic, infantile, and the growth period, which includes subluxation, dislocation, and the dislocatable hips, along with the abnormal developed acetabula, like dysplastic acetabula. So these, coming to the epidemiology, they are more common in their common incidences 1:1,000 labors, and females are more commonly involved, and it's more common in breech presentations. And most of them are firstborns. And then why these things occur? The etiology is mechanical factors. It's more common in breech deliveries, and where they practice the habit of carrying the babies in a swaddling cloth with hips extended and adducted. This will lead to abnormal pressure to the normal development of the acetabulum, and there will be a deficient lateral wall of the acetabulum. So Next is the hormonal factors. The relaxin hormone and the estrogen hormones, which get secreted in the females, will lead to the ligament laxity. That's why the more incidence is more in the females. The newborn, firstborn, again, the virgin uterus which has not expanded, it sometimes because of the oligohydramnios or something, there will be intrauterine crowding effect and the breech deliveries. So that will prevent the rotation of the fetus, leading to breech deliveries. And so again, the dislocations are more common. So next thing is, after this, how do the babies present to the clinic? Yeah. So in the neonate period, it can be identified only by Oates and Borlaugh's test, and after the 1 month age, it's because of the contracture of the ligaments. One will identify this limitation of abduction of the affected side, and maybe you will see a Galeazzi sign, limitation of movements, everything. So in a walking child, they will present with a short limb, toe walking, Galeazzi sign, and vascular sign of Narath. In case of bilateral cases, they will have similar thing. They will have excessive lordosis, waddling gait, and all. Okay, as time is shortage, I am closing it up so that we'll see. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.